Welcome to the channel as we have a special episode full of thrills, chills, and spine-tingling excitement. On the desk today we have this Tektronix TDS420A digital oscilloscope. It is the second iteration of Tektronix's first generation digital oscilloscope. It is a CRT based unit, but it is digital. This particular unit is filthy. This pouch came with it, and there's more grime than pouch. In addition, we also got the owner's manual with it, but the owner's manual turned out to be covered in grime. This scope is, as you can see, a cathedral of filth. I've got a big job ahead of me, scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing this thing. The manual is, however, in excellent condition, and hopefully I'll be able to restore that and have that around as a reference. This scope is, however, not without problems. This scope here has a problem with power unlatching. As you see, I press the button and it will not start. You get a quick blink and that's it. However, if you hold down the button, you will find out that the scope will start, but you gotta hold it all the way through the power on cycle. And then you have to press buttons on the menu panel in order to try and get it to come up and running. That's a big pain. I do, however, have an idea of where to look to fix this issue, and really it boils down to a battery. However, no matter how hard I try, I cannot turn a battery swap, even a complex one like you will see we have here, into a 25 to 35 minute episode of John Tinkers. So in addition to fixing the batteries and getting this unit to the point where it will power on without breaking my thumb, we're going to go ahead and replace the capacitors in the low voltage power supply, because those have tended to be an issue in the past. And we're going to also take a good hard look at the backplane into which the cards insert. You have to remember that inside this scope it's pretty much a PC. Finally, we're going to play a little game of Pimp My Scope. We're going to add new features to the scope using the software interface called the console, which is plugged into with a serial port that's attached to the CPU card inside the scope. This is something that has been done on YouTube before, so I feel that we can jump right in and do it ourselves. Okay, so let's start dissecting this scope. As you can see here, we have a typical Tektronix scope from the late 80s to mid 90s. It has the L-shaped connector IEC on it. This particular one has a GPIB, as you can see in the card, and it also has a VGA output, which is going to make this scope very useful when it gets on my bench. So let's get the back off. The cool thing about Tektronix scopes of this era is that every single screw was a Torx headed screw, which they simply don't strip. Now in this particular case it gets even better, because every single screw on the scope is a Torx 15, which means I only need one driver to get it. The only thing is that in my hand tools, the only Torx screwdriver I have that's a 15 head is pretty darn small. It's my plan by the end of the episode to fix that issue. As for now, we just have to remove the screws from the back panel, and as you can see, it's a tedious process, but it's getting done. After we do that, all we have to do is slide off that panel, and we'll be ready to pop the scope out and begin work on its interior. Now we're going to turn the scope, because this Tektronix scope has something unique. There's a set screw in it on the front panel side of the container on the side of the scope, and that keeps you from being able to just slide it right out like you could with my older scopes you see in the background. But it's easy to remove, and then off we can go to get this thing apart. Man, even the power cord on this thing was filthy. So now I'm trying to figure out how to open this up without getting myself covered in grime, because this thing is a cathedral of filth. It will take us a while to clean it up. I'm trying to here figure out how to pull out the clip that's holding in the power cord. It's easily done when you use a pair of pliers, but I didn't figure that out for several minutes. And now off we go with the cover, nice and easy. And here we have the bottom of the scope. The small board toward my left hand is the attenuator board, and that's connected to the inputs. The larger board, hiding behind my shoulder for the most part, is the acquisition board, and that acquires the signals and processes them. I'm checking right now and I don't see any electrolytic capacitors with leakage. That was a big problem on early acquisition boards in the 420A, and we do not have that here. Sit there and spend a lot of time trying to remove small electrolytic capacitors that are surface mount and the size of BBs. And here are some examples. As you can see, they're small. The leads are flat and on either side of the cans, and you have to be very, very patient and very, very skilled to get these out. Luckily, the board is pristine, as you can see, so we don't have a worry here. And here we have the cage with the cards in them. This is the part that's like a PC. The first card is a digital signal processor card. The second one is a VGA. And that last one right there is the CPU card, the one with the little rectangular connector on it. The rectangular connector is where we connect a serial port and use a terminal program on a computer in order to adjust values and configurations inside the scope. Not for calibration constants or anything like that. Now let's have a peek. You see that yellow thing there? That's a battery. Look carefully above there and you'll see a second battery. The top one goes to the digital signal processor board, and that's what saves waveforms, that's what saves your panel settings and the like. Down on the bottom, the daytime clock and the latching for the power supply is controlled by that battery there. Now I want to quickly address an old wives' tale. TDS420A scopes with the serial number at or above 50,000 do not need these batteries to keep their calibration constants. If you pull the batteries off the boards, you won't lose anything. Don't be fearmongered. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these batteries out, we're going to test them for voltage, and then we're going to go ahead and replace them both. We're going to easily pop out the battery for the DSP board, and that's the first thing we're going to take a measurement of. I took a measurement and it came up at 3.0 volts exactly, which is perfect. We're still going to go ahead and change that battery anyway, because it is an old battery coming up on 30 years old. The fact that it works at all is an amazing thing. Now we're going to pop out the other battery. That takes a little bit of work, but we are able to get it out with some success. And we have it out.
Oh no.
No worries, easily fixed. Easily held in place with a pair of ceramic tweezers. Now it's time to measure the voltage on this CPU card battery, which is the one that we need to worry about. And what did we get? 0.54 volts. So now we know what we need to do. We need to pop out these batteries and replace them both. However, the batteries here are of an interesting vintage and you can't just buy them in the store. So a little bit of searching found out that we could replace them with a common battery, CR3. And guess what? They'll even perform better than the regular batteries. So now it's time to disassemble the scope, pull out the batteries, and put them together. There's a little bit of work to be done there. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pop out these vertical plastic pieces that hold the cards into place safely. So now it's time to pop the cards out of the scope in order to do the battery changes. These cards are just like PC cards in the 90s. In fact, they're exactly like them. They're ISA bus PC cards. I've taken out and put in hundreds of these, but for some reason these weren't moving when I wanted them to. Now, if you'll notice, there's still a couple of screws there that really should have been taken care of before. Why? Because Tektronix, unlike other companies, builds things with over-engineering in mind. Not only were there top screws that I had to take out, but there were bottom screws that were holding the cards into place. Once I had that figured out, things became a lot easier, a lot quicker. Then all we had to do was start removing the card. I'm being very gentle here because the cards are 30 years old. Furthermore, there are ribbon cables attached to this card. One goes to the front panel and controls basically the entire scope. The other one goes to the floppy drive. You can't mess either one up or the scope will not power up properly. So I'm being extraordinarily careful here. Once I get it out, then we can make sure that the cables are routed correctly when we reinstall. And then finally we have success. Out comes the card, no damage to the scope. And here you have it. The board is removed from the scope and we have the CPU board now out on the bench. You can see there is a sealed area to the left and the battery is connected at the bottom. We're going to remove that battery and we're going to replace it. We need to keep the jack and the wires intact, so what we're going to do is cut that battery off of that jack and solder on a new battery. And I have the new battery right here on the bench. It's a CR123A, and what we're going to do is sand the top and the bottom to make a rough surface, add some flux, and put a blob of solder on the top and the bottom of the battery. We're going to cool off the battery in between these operations. Then we're going to solder pieces of wire onto each end, and we're going to solder those wires into the jack wires and put on shrink tubing for proper insulation. Let's get busy. Time to do some quick sanding on both ends of the battery, and that'll make it rough for the solder to attach. Now for a quick word.
I find your lack of subscription to the John Tinker's channel quite disturbing.
Now what we're going to do is apply some flux, and we're going to do the soldering. The paper towel is there to cool off the battery after we do the soldering. It's not the best idea to leave the battery to get super hot, which is why you'll see that I do things fairly quickly here. I'm going to use a little bit more of a stout flux, and then bam, it gets right in there and does the trick. Then what I have to do is turn the battery over and get it done the other way, so I use my pliers to hold it into place. And then it's basically a repetition of the same process with hardier pliers. Once the blob is on there, we cool it off, and then what we're going to do is we're going to check the voltages and make sure that everything is cool. Now we'll make sure that the battery did not get damaged by doing the soldering. As you see, we're putting the leads on, and our measurement was 3.3 volts, and that is beautiful. So we're ready to continue on and solder on the wires that we're going to use to connect the battery into the scope. Time to get soldering. First up, we'll put the red wire onto the top of the battery. This is just a very simple operation of melting the solder, and we're done with it that quickly. Now all we have to do is cool it off and go to the other side and get it done. Next up is we're going to use my big old lineman pliers as an effective clamp to give us a little bit of a helping hand here. And then we will solder on the negative wire on the bottom of the battery. And we're going to make sure that we keep them lined up so that we don't have a problem when we go to clip them into the scope. So I have to do a little bit of gymnastics here. And with a little bit of effort, I'm able to get the wire soldered on and soldered on securely. And that's really all that we have to do prior to putting the card back into the scope. And now cooling it off and we're done. And I'll quickly grab the test leads and check voltages on the jack, and we'll make sure that we're getting it. And I'm measuring the same 3.25 roughly that I measured at the beginning. So everything is cool. Time to reassemble. But first I forgot one little thing. I'm going to take a little bit of IPA, that's isopropyl alcohol, and I'm going to clean this flux off of the ends of the battery where it's soldered with the wires. So I grab a little Q-tip, grab some IPA, and a quick swabbing, and we're going to get done with that, and we'll be ready to put everything back into the scope and run a quick test to see if we fixed our power button latching error. And it's time to pop the CPU card back into the scope. Here we have the scope back up on the bench, and you'll see that I'm going to slowly lower the card in. It's an ISA card, like I said before, and you can see the old-fashioned PC connectors, the same you'd see in a PC XT from IBM of roughly 12 years before this scope was even built. Tektronix wasn't always known for putting in technology that was beyond the cutting edge. They looked for a lot of tried and true things so that they could keep quality and reliability at a maximum. So in this goes to the scope. The board is in, the scope is in place, and we're ready to give it a shot. Well, here goes nothing. Well, would you look at that? We have an immediate success. The scope is beginning its power up process. Now I apologize for the motion here and for the fact that my camera went on and focus and defocus spree here, but you will get to see it. What you're looking at is the normal startup procedure for this series of scopes. The weird graphics, etc., are actually intentional on Tektronix part. Then you get the little clock thingy here, which runs for a little while. Now older Tektronix scopes, such as the 465B, would boot up fairly rapidly. In fact, we're talking seconds. This here is closer to a minute and a half to fully boot up. As you see, it continues through the cycle, and then you start getting the screen, and what's going to pop up next will be a diagnostics screen that will tell you what the condition of the scope is. In our case, it passed. So look at that, we have success. I took a little bit of time and doodled around with the menus a little bit just to make sure that the scope was working fairly well. And then after I did all that, I shut it off and powered it up again to make sure that the latching continued to work, which it did. And now I'm going to go ahead and pump in some signal, and we're going to make sure that the scope has a good trace and that we get triggers and that basically we have a working functional scope. Once we know that, we can continue on. So I'm going to feed my function generator into channel 1, and we'll kick in a sine wave and we'll see what happens here. And here we go, and we get a nice little sine wave. And everything looks good there. It triggers almost in the exact middle of the waveform. I used the auto sequence in order to get this, and it looks really good. Now we're going to go ahead and add a second sine wave in here, and we'll be able to do some comparison math and make sure that the scope is fully operational. And the first thing I have to do, aside from fix the focus on my camera, is we have to figure out, here we go, and we see that channel 2 is there, and channel 2 has a different voltage per division. So we're going to adjust that, and then we're going to go ahead and now it's time to do the capacitor replacement dance. And now we're looking at the backplane board into which all the cards connect. And what am I showing you? There is a capacitor here that is blown, and it appears to have been installed the wrong way. I'm going to point it up to you right now, and you can take a look at it for yourself. What we're going to do is remove this guy and put it in the right way after cleaning the board. But in addition, we're going to replace every single capacitor on this backplane board.
This is the Capacitor Police. We approve of this video.
Okay, we're back. Guess what? The caps are in. Now I've removed the bulged cap from the board, and here it is. Let me zoom in on it because this is an interesting thing here. So you can see the bottom is blown out, the top is bulged up, and the sides are coming apart. It had spewed a fair amount of electrolyte onto the circuit board, and when we bring the circuit board into focus, we can see that I've cleaned it. I'm going to do just a little bit more cleaning with some IPA prior to beginning the work, which we're going to do by soldering things in. Now, one thing that was interesting is that I noticed that the cap was facing the other direction from all the other caps. So the first thought was, okay, someone replaced the cap and put it in backwards. Guess what? I looked. The cap was soldered in with the same wave soldering technique and was the exact same model of cap as every other one on the board. My guess, especially after looking at pictures online of other known good boards, is that this particular board had this one cap. This 35 volt 225 microfarad cap was installed backwards. No idea why it happened, but it did. Now we're going to, sorry about the shake there. I'm trying to get the image stabilized. There we go. What we're going to do is we're going to replace all the caps on this board. Okay, all of the caps have been replaced, and now it's time to do a little bit of board cleanup. This should be fairly quick. We're just going to take some IPA to the back of the board, and that'll put us in good shape. Okay, we've replaced all the caps. We've scrubbed the living daylights out of the case, out of the faceplate. We scrubbed and polished up the screen and the controls as much as we could on the front. And now I'm trying to figure out how to wiggle in the backplane board. That's a lot of fun because there are two slots, very small slots, through which you have to fish flat cables. And if you break those, you are up a creek and the paddle is nowhere to be found. So I very carefully got those through. That took a little bit of time. Once they were in, I snapped in the backplane and then proceeded to attach it. First, I put the ribbon cables on the bottom, then I went ahead and screwed everything in. And then after that, we went ahead and mounted the cards into the PCs, making sure that the ribbon cables that were involved were properly routed to the right cards and in such a way that they wouldn't get pinched or cut when cards went back in. There are a lot of connections to be made, including a big 22-pin connector to the left, right where my hands are at this time. And those were a lot of fun to get taken care of. We did do that, and at this point, we were ready to start doing the rest of it. So in went the cards, in went the cables, and at that point, it was time to test. And then that's where the fun ended. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and to subscribe and to hit the bell so that you are notified of new episodes. Please join our Patreon page, which you can do for free if you don't want to be a financial supporter. Thank you for being here. May you have joy unspeakable and full of glory and the peace that passes all understanding.